Load up the presentation. So I'm going to present on here.
There we go. We can see it.
Fantastic. Sorry, she's not showing up. Oh, no, spoilers.
On the list. Oh no, I'm in.
Sorry, how do I? Do you have the option to kick me, Caroline, just so I can go in again? Sorry, it's low. Oh, no,
Yeah.
Apologies, can you just see the actual screen itself?
Yeah, we can see the decoding hiring process standing out in your main page.
Okay, fair. Hi everyone, thank you very much for coming. So I'll give introductions about myself and our company in a bit. But effectively today we'll be going over decoding the hiring process and standing out in NHS applications and interviews. Some of the stuff that we'll be covering today includes what we do as a company, what panels look for, writing high-scoring supporting statements, common mistakes when it comes to interviews, interview presentations, designing a high-impact presentation, performing strong at interview, standing out from other candidates, do's and don'ts, key takeaways and any questions. I know that there were quite a few comments really in terms of what you're likely to get from this session. So we've tried our very best to incorporate those points, but obviously as and when, if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask them during the presentation. So in terms of what we do as a company, so we were started 15 years ago as a executive search and senior interim management firm. Since then, we've invested in a number of different areas, and my role at Hunters is the head of BI for analytics and data warehousing. Typically, that focuses on interim recruitment, so people on contracts, statements of work and consultancy. In my team, we've also got Steve, who is the other head of BI, and Peter Dewberry. A few of the names in the call might recognise some of them because I recognise yours. But many people think NHS recruitment is subjective or inconsistent, but in reality, it's one of the most structured recruitment systems you'll ever encounter. But effectively, that's what we'll be going over today. So in terms of what panels look for, when a panel looks at your application or listens to your interview, there is scoring 4 things: evidence, impact, clarity, and relevance. Evidence means what you did in BI and analytics roles. That includes things like building SQL queries, developing data models, designing Power BI dashboards, creating ETL processes, or validating data with clinicians, or delivering reporting to operational teams. Impact means what changed as a result of your work. Did your analysis reduce waiting times? Did it help a service redesign a pathway? Did it improve financial control? Did it better support clinical or operational decisions? And clarity means how easy is it for a panel to understand your example? Panels are often reading dozens of applications and interviewing multiple candidates. If they have to work hard to understand what you did, you will score lower. Relevance means how closely, apologies, they're not working as they should, the prompts. But clarity, relevance means how closely your experience matches the role. An example about an acute RTT pathway will score more highly for an acute trust rather than something generic. So next, in terms of how to write high-scoring supporting statements. NHS supporting statements are not like private sector CVs, they're read as narratives. They're read against the person specification. Shortlisting panels sit with the person specification and go through each of the essential and desirable criteria. They look for evidence in your application that matches each one. If it is not there, you do not score. This is why structure is critical. A simple approach is start, situation, task, action, result. For example, instead of saying I have experience in reporting, you could say I was supporting the elective care pathway where RTT breaches were increasing. My task was to improve visibility. I wrote SQL queries against the data warehouse, built Power BI dashboards, and worked with operational managers to validate the data. As a result, the service was able to identify backlogs earlier and improve compliance. That single paragraph gives the panel evidence, impact, and relevance. It also matched directly to multiple criteria such as analytical skills, stakeholder engagement, and service improvement. Always describe your own contribution. Panels cannot score what your team did. They can only score what you did. In terms of common mistakes, strong candidates often fail at application stage because they are too vague, too modest, or too team focused. Statements like, we built a dashboard, or my team delivered reports, do not tell the panel what you personally did. Another common mistake is not showing impact. Saying you produce reports is not enough. You must explain what changed because of those reports. Did it lead to different decisions? Did it lead to reduced risk? Did it improve performance? Finally, many people forget to link their experience back to the person specification. If it's not clearly mapped to our criteria, it will not score, even if the work itself was excellent. One of the points as well that I picked up from the attendee list, someone asked me a question around how, when asked about my weaknesses, what should I answer? So I think it's quite subjective, but typically for me, I like to be able, when referencing a weakness, something that could be turned into a strength. So, for example, myself personally, sometimes I can take on too much at once. So that might be, I'm finishing either a couple of searches, certain reports or proposals, and trying to spread myself across all of these at once. I can be quite thin. So instead of being able to take on two or three things at once and be able to get them completed and sent out, I may be spending longer working across them than I can be just completing them individually. So for me, that weakness, the willing to want to take on more is not necessarily a bad thing, but the way I'm doing it and not being as effective as I can is. I think with perfectionism as well, often when we're doing interviews, I think perfectionism is quite an easy one because, it sounds good, but if you are a perfectionist, I think it's very important to give reasons as to why, and being able where to draw the line in terms of being able to complete a task at hand but spending too long on it. That's quite hard to differentiate, but it's always worth going into these processes being able to, clearly articulate your strengths and I think some weaknesses that can be spun into positives. How to deal with interview presentations. So many healthcare BI and analytics interviews often include a presentation. These are often based on a scenario such as improving cancer reporting, designing a data warehouse, or supporting an ICB with performance monitoring. Panels are not testing whether you can build the perfect technical solution. They are testing how you think under pressure and how you approach a real NHS problem. They want to see whether you understand NHS context, including patient pathways, data quality, information governance, and stakeholder needs. They also want to see whether you can balance technical detail with what matters to clinicians and managers. They're also looking at how you decide what to include when time is limited. That prioritization tells them a lot about how you would perform in the role. In terms of how to design a high-impact presentation, a high-scoring presentation has a clear structure and a clear story. Start with the problem. What is the service trying to achieve? What is not working? What is the impact on patients, clinicians, or performance? Then explain your approach. Who would you speak to first? Which stakeholders matter the most? What data sources would you use? How would you check data quality and consistency across systems? Then explain the solution. Would you build a Power BI dashboard, redesign a data model, introduce a new reporting process, or enhance the data warehouse? Explain why that choice makes sense in its relevant healthcare context. Finally, explain the impact. How would this help clinicians, service managers, or executives make better decisions? How would it improve patient flow, waiting time, safety, or financial control? This is how you demonstrate strategic thinking, stakeholder awareness, and the ability to deliver. In terms of how to perform strongly in interview, this will come as no surprise, but preparation is critical for interviews. You should go in with several strong examples that show technical delivery, analytical thinking, and stakeholder engagement. These examples should cover different areas. For example, one about SQL and data modeling, one about dashboards and insight, and one about working with commissions or operational teams. Practice saying them out loud so they sound natural and confident. You want to be able to explain your work clearly without hesitating or underselling yourself. And finally, speaking first person, panels cannot score your team. They can only score you. If you built something, say you built it. Also, remember your professional identity. You're not just someone who works with data. You are someone who supports patient data, performance and decision making through data. That is how the NHS sees high value analysts. How to stand out from other candidates? I think this came up quite a lot when people were applying for this seminar. So firstly, most candidates have similar technical skills. Many will know SQL, other tools such as Power BI and data modeling. But what differentiates you is not whether you know the tools, but how you use them and into the context. For me, when shortlisting both through NHS jobs and other fields, a lot of people will just reference in their CV that they've used a certain tool. For me, if I can't see within it what they're actually doing within that job title, I will do some further probing. And obviously, with the strength of NHS shortlists at the moment, due to a number of changes, just referencing that tool, in your profile or introduction can be the difference between you being shortlisted and not, because clients will very clearly want to see what you've done with that tool, how you used it, and what the benefits were. In terms of showing how your work delivers real value and to patients and services, so do you understand pathways, targets, and operational pressures? Can you explain how your work supports decision making? Can you show that you understand the reality of healthcare services? And then candidates who show impact, NHS awareness, and confidence in their professional identity would always stand out from those who only talk about technology. In terms of do's and don'ts in interviews, so panels reward clarity, evidence, and relevance. If you make it easy for them to see your value, you will score higher. So in terms of some do's, be specific about what you did. So within your role, you'll need to be able to clearly articulate, what your involvement was in that project or business as usual task, how you went about achieving it, the organisation from delivering it. Show measurable impact, i.e. my analysis on this part of the business identified X. X was then turned into operational impact, which also achieved this. Link directly to the criteria. In terms of some of the don'ts, don't be vague or generic. People are going to want to see exactly what you've done. And being vague or specific can lead to a lot of ambiguity, which at shortlisting is not something that you want. Hide behind your team. I think there's loads of brilliant high-performing teams across the NHS and wider healthcare sector. It's important to be able to clearly articulate what you did, as opposed just to relying on the successes of your team. And assume the panel understands your context. A lot of the time, people go into some quite very technical jargon, and this could be lost on them, for example. So I think it's linking back to that earlier point around point, evidence, and explain for panels at shortlisting stage. Assess what you did and also your suitability towards the role. So in terms of key takeaways, NHS recruitment and wider healthcare recruitment is a scoring system. Your goal is to make your evidence easy to score. And when you clearly link your BI, analytics, and data warehousing work to NHS and healthcare outcomes and explain it with confidence, that's how you will stand out. And that's it from me. So it's on to questions. People would like to ask in the chat. hopefully we have some questions.
Yeah, hopefully. Sometimes it takes a couple. There we go. We got a couple coming in. Someone asked, so CV pages, usually 1 or 2 pages.
So it's a difficult one. I mean, for me personally, I tend to kind of like 2 to 3. It's very difficult to be able to explain exactly what you did in the role in 1 page. Even for those that are, they might have recently graduated, to be able to go into a role, it's very important to be able to reference what technologies you may have worked with during your studies or placement years and whether that has any impact. For those that are already in the NHS or healthcare system, I just don't think having anything on 1 page is going to be able to give them that level of detail at the shortlisting process, because, as we say, you may reference a tool or a software that you've worked on. It's going to be very hard for the people that are shortlisting to be able to assess what you did with that tool or that level. So typically, I like to think 2 to 3. Obviously, the longer that you've done this, the more experience that you'll have. Don't feel the need to pad it out, but please be very clear when you're explaining exactly what you did in that role and what it achieved. Next up, we've got Hayden. At managerial leadership level, showing evidence of products is harder. Any advice? That's a good question, Hayden, because typically as you go up the ladder, or the healthcare ladder, so to speak, at a managerial level, your role will be less hands-on in terms of delivering that, but overseeing the teams. I think from that perspective, assuming that you're at a manager level at the moment, and perhaps you're looking to move towards head of or AD, referencing what your team did and what you had oversight at that point is important. What I was leaning towards earlier around you should rely on the successes of your teammate, for me, that would personally be an analyst, a developer, or perhaps DBA level. So, that's more peer achievements. Whereas I suppose at a manager level, if you're looking to move up, you very clearly need to articulate what your immediate team did. So you'd be able to articulate that experience perhaps through, I was tasked with delivering this. I came up with the strategy, the planning through X, Y, and Z. This is what the team achieved. Because being able to deliver your experience in a managerial context is very different between being able to comment on what you did as a peer, if that makes sense. I hope I answered that better, but please let me know if I could. While applying for NHS jobs on track, there are answers expected while answering the questions. The 1,500 word limit should include all work responsibilities and examples demonstrating it. So I'm guessing that we're on about hitting your job and where you're at, and then you get asked questions around this part specifically, or sorry, I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly. So if we're trying to summarize our role within 1,500 words, I think that's a good amount. That's what, a page and a half. So
Yeah,
that's quite a lot of detail about each role. I wouldn't feel the need to go towards that word limit. If it's, if all the experience that you did is incredibly relevant to the next role, then feel free to include it. But the danger of padding out these questions with filler words, perhaps, or irrelevant context, is that whoever's shortlisting you, when they're going to be analysing and going through this, it's going to lose some of the impact of it. It's important to make sure that whatever you're including within these questions is incredibly punchy and relevant, because we don't want to lose the panel through reviewing. Okay, you said to make things relevant to the particular role, e.g. elective care and hospital trust. But supposing you worked in a different area, e.g. for an ICB, how can you bridge this gap? Assuming you have relevant skills, your experience is in a different area. That's a really good question, Kay. And you're right, it's difficult to articulate experience that you haven't done before. I think there's a few ways really to go about this. If the experience yourself, if you haven't done that before, I would perhaps try and look at some of the software or tools that that have been used quite heavily in the roles before. And if you can give, perhaps pad out your experience in that. So say, for example, electric care, you haven't looked at that before, but there's certain stuff that you have and try and pad out that experience. I mean, ultimately, it is very difficult at the moment with a large amount of people looking at work, how to stand out on the application. So I think if you can give examples in further detail of what you have done for other parts of the role, ideally, so back yourself on the technical skills. Whether there's any ways of thinking, I don't know, that you might be able to reference in your CV that could be relevant here. Certain methodologies could be relevant, but ultimately it's very difficult to be able to sell yourself to a data set, for example, like elective care that you haven't looked at before. But my advice would be to try and back yourself within that profile in terms of where you do fit, and hope that you can get shortlisted and come across an interview, and get the chance, I suppose, to project yourself in an interview. But ultimately, it's very, very difficult. Is it compulsory to ask questions during an interview, and what type of questions can be asked? So it's not compulsory, but for me personally, I feel you would be marked down for not answering questions. Obviously, this is your chance, one, to allow you to know a bit more about the role, but two, show that enthusiasm. Sometimes, for me personally, when we're hosting interviews on behalf of NHS clients, the interview can go really well, and that final question and answer stage is the chance to project yourself. Show the enthusiasm, the motivation. That's where you get the chance to do that. So good questions could be, assuming I was appointed in 6 months' time, what would success look like? And also at that 12 and 24 months' time. Generally, that's good because it's showing that you want to be there for a while, but you want to be towards the top of the pack in terms of what it is that you're delivering. So anything to do with how success looks in the first 6, 12 or 24 months, for me, is very key. Anything about culture? Obviously, since COVID, I think a lot of teams have been all over the place, and all of the directors that I speak to across the NHS and chief analytics officers, they're trying to encourage the team to go back to work. And what they don't, not in all cases, because it depends on the nature of your role, but typically, they're looking for those individuals that want to come in and be integrating themselves in and amongst the team. So these sort of questions around culture would be super important, because I think that's putting you in good, to show yourself to being one of these proactive individuals that wants to get in and amongst the team. Any tips for transitioning or proving transferable skills? I think that's a difficult one then, Pat. Obviously, we touched on that with Kay. Visualization skills, potentially. I mean, say, I don't know, if you're super experienced in Tableau and you're looking to go for a Power BI role, I think the context here is the ways of working. So, for example, in terms of dashboard management, in both roles, you might meet with stakeholders. Clearly define the ask, make tweaks. The thinking will still be the same in that context. It's just ultimately the technology that you're using it for is a bit different. So ideally, if you can reference the ways of thinking as opposed to the task itself, ultimately the thought process in some circumstances will be the same, but ultimately the choice of output will be different, would be my opinion there. How do you go when you have a panel made of both technical and non-technical members? So Totsi, this is a really good question. So for me, hiring managers are almost a bit greedier than when I joined Hunter 8 years ago. They kind of want more. So 7, 8 years ago, you wanted an analyst. You had an analyst that couldn't talk tech, or you had a developer that couldn't necessarily talk like an analyst. So it's important to be able to relay technical queries to non-technical stakeholders. you want to be able to talk in a language basically that both understands. So speaking, for example, with head come from an analyst background or a developer, but it's being able to deliver that in a language both people understand. You may find that people that come from an analyst background will understand a bit more around the operational side and skill sets, whereas obviously people that have come from the technical, more developer backgrounds, they're going to want to know a bit more context, around sort of SQL Server, how data warehouses think. Just being able to deliver a response that both people understand. But I suppose being able to deliver that response and how's best to do it is probably, it would help if you knew a bit more about the context of the panel, I suppose, because they'll tend to come from either an operational or a background which is used to working very closely with operational teams, and that will be their jargon, or they may come from a background which is very technical and data warehouse related. Sharia, recent graduate placements, done some personal Power BI projects. The roles applying for data sectors like analysis need to be 1,500. Do they need to be 1,500 words? The projects I've done, pushed to GitHub and the hiring team check GitHub potentially, or just what I wrote on the CV. It's a difficult one, I suppose. As a graduate, typically you may be going for entry level roles. With entry-level roles, they're not necessarily going to be looking too much at work experience. It would be more potentially around the sort of products that you've worked on. In terms of being able to stand out as a graduate, any sort of for me, I suppose this is true for all levels really. But what differentiates applicants for me is probably what they do outside of their core hours. So, is there any reading that you've done? Are there any courses that you've signed up? The people that will come to the top of the pile in shortlisting, so to speak, will be the ones that, want to go above and beyond outside of their normal duty. The peers at their level from neighbouring provider or commissioning organisations. Done. I can see a partner's answer on there. A partner's great, so no doubt she'll be able to give a better answer than me on that one anyway. Yeah. And then any further questions?
Just from me to feed in on the sort of transferable skills question earlier on, I came from teaching high school physics into data analytics in the NHS. And I think for me, I tried to write down all of the skills that they were looking for and just think of those concrete examples of where I've done it, even if it was in a different way, like you were saying. But if it's talking about things with data, there's probably most jobs where you've done something. So for me, if I could talk about how I tracked student growth and what I did with that information and how I used it to improve or give them individualized plans or anything like that, or always worked really well for me. So just think about those things that you have done and how you can relate it to the job. So there is lots of transferable skills. You just have to be a bit creative in how you kind of relate it to what you're trying to apply for.
Yeah, I think that's a great response, Carolyn. So we've had a question from Graham. If you know the panel's level of knowledge, are you okay to talk about that level, or should you still demonstrate being able to talk to non-technical colleagues? I think that's difficult because, I don't know, say if you're going for a data warehouse manager position, for example, potentially outside of leadership and what you've done at that level, it's going to be very technical in terms of the discussion and the questions that are being answered in that. So a really good way for me in terms of being able to demonstrate those soft core skills would be perhaps who you've worked with from an operational side. As we all know, operational colleagues like BI and information teams, they're going to be super busy. They're not going to have loads of time to chat, and they're going to want to know succinctly what's going on, or perhaps even ask you, some specific request in a very prompt manner. So I think it'd be quite good in terms of following up some of those questions, Graham, with perhaps where you've worked I don't know, where you work closely with operational colleagues and perhaps analytical colleagues, being able to show and demonstrate for me those relationships would give the panel a good indication that you can operate, can work well very closely with non-technical colleagues. For each line in the JD, how long should each answer be in the supporting statement? 1 to 2 paragraphs. Generally speaking, so when we all present CVs, it depends really. I think for me, 2 paragraphs is a good amount. If you've done more and you can give really specific examples in terms of why it's relevant to the role, feel free to give more. But as I say, try not to add sentences in that don't add any context or back up an example for any reason. Would be my advice on that part. Yeah. And just see if we've got any further questions. I think we've still got quite a bit of time left, so feel free to reference anything. Thank you again, Aparna. Aparna, we should get you on stage, surely.
No. I'm only listening in, James, but really helpful session as well, especially for managers like us who are sifting through personal supporting statements. People can obviously go on and on about what they want to relay to the managers. One of the things I would just say, just don't use AI. Using AI for grammatical, correcting that, grammar around that is fine, but we can easily identify if they are AI driven. So just make sure you are true to yourself. Scoring is purely based on the personal specification. And supporting statement is only for us to make that decision to say that, okay, maybe this is worth calling the person. So evidences, we like evidences, we definitely do. So just use that space. It's only 1,500 words and you can go on and on. So just be specific.
Excellent. And while you're here, Aparna, I don't suppose there's anything else you'd like to add to any of the other questions maybe, or something that you felt could have been answered better?
Yeah, I think it's all right, especially for leaders like us who are obviously trying to progress into transferable skills is definitely a challenge. And we probably would not score as much who has had a direct experience with roles like deputy CDIOs and stuff, if you've done some work around that. So that's definitely a challenge. One of the things I will encourage people in the call here is, if you have identified a role in NHS jobs that you really like and you think you can bring your experience to it, we suggest having a personal chat with the advertising or the recruiting manager if you can, just to understand the role better. That definitely helps, and it gives them the overview of you as a person as well, because remember, we've only got hundreds of applications and we can't see the person as well. So it obviously helps if you can have an informal chat, understand what the department you're working for, what is it that they are, what their organization chart looks like. Just be nosy about, that organization as a whole, and then that might help as well outside of the application.
I think that's a really relevant point there, Aparna. A lot of job descriptions can, in certain cases, be outdated. They're kind of pulled together from a few old ones, and sometimes when jobs are posted, it doesn't tell the full story. So being able to reach out to a contact at the organisation, one, you're showing your interest, but two, you're able to help tailor these profiles to the specific asks that may not be referenced very clearly in those job descriptions. And then there's a recent graduate for technical roles in the CV profile, but does the profile matter? Is that rather generic? So typically I like to see a couple of sentences of this referencing very clearly what some of the most relevant experience and where you've done it at in relation to the role. So for example, for a Power BI developer, so you might give a couple of sentences. Aparna has 10 years as a Power BI developer across organisations such as South West London, North London NHS Trust, developing dashboards and working with a variety of stakeholders. Some of these dashboards have influenced decisions such as X, Y, and Z, which have gone on to this. Don't necessarily just try and pad it out, but if you can fit organisations in, you referenced it, please see this bio as a very short, succinct summary in terms of why they should read further. I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that, Aparna?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, yeah, referencing that is definitely helpful.
Fantastic. And then any final questions? No.
Oh, one more.
Great. What proportion of NHS organisations are requiring in-person attendance versus remote working? What would a typical home office pattern be, which would allow flexible working? I think, Graham, it completely depends on organisations. This is my opinion, and not necessarily the NHS in general, but a lot of the hiring managers that I'm speaking to like on-site presence. You know, they like people being able to come in and get in between the teams. Now, I think it depends on the nature of your role because depending on what it is that you're going for, some development roles can be very isolated. You know, there isn't a lot of engagement outside of the team. So on that sense, it's not necessarily more effective for you to come to work, but they would still like people in and around. In terms of leadership roles, I'm seeing anywhere between 2 and 3, going up to director and chief analytics officer. You know, they're generally in 3 to 4. But I'd say the majority of organisations like it day on site. It's been quite tricky since COVID because there was a lot of movement in COVID due to additional funding that was pumped through organisations. So, you know, there may be a lot of people at North who have got jobs down south and vice versa. So it's not always easy for people to be able to come to site from those positions. But generally speaking, throughout the application process, if possible, and you know, given people's circumstances, that's not always the case. I feel that certain people would score higher, you know, if they were showing the willingness to be able to come and want to get amongst the teams. But as I say, that's just my opinion. And what would a typical home office pattern be? Very varied. Most teams are doing between sort of 1 to 2 days on site. Some are doing more, some are doing less. Can we get in touch with you on LinkedIn? Yes. What I'll do is I'll post while we're here. So we've got a generic AphA address which we use for any queries about our lunch and learn. So please feel free to reach out to that. And I believe if you search James Morris Hunter Healthcare on LinkedIn, I should come up. So feel free to reach out to me with any queries on that. Can I ask for the names of people on my interview panel ahead of interview? I'm not sure on this one, Mercy. So sometimes you can, usually there's a contact number that you can reach out to. Sometimes they'll keep it confidential if they're not sure who's going to be on interview. But generally speaking, yes, you can always reach out and ask. So if you can, feel free. Typically speaking, the more you know about the panel, you know, the better it is. It might be that you worked with some of the same people before, which is obviously going to be very useful to, you know, reference, drop in. So yeah, if you can find out those names, feel free to reach out to them when NHS drops and ask. Approach it in a manner in terms of I'd like to learn a bit more about my panel ahead of interview so that I can better prepare my questions for those types of stakeholders would probably be quite a good approach in terms of why you're requesting these names. But generally speaking, you know, the candidates that score higher are the inquisitive ones, the ones that put in more interview presentation and want to find out bits of information like this. So if you can ask, please feel free.
Yeah, I was on a hiring panel for the new directors at the BSA last year, and we had one person that had applied that came in and basically just was like hello and just like said everybody's name and like just went and like just knew everyone's name, and that was a pretty, I haven't seen, that was the first person that did that, but it definitely kind of set the tone for like them being personable. So yeah, if you know their names, that can be cool.
Yeah, I think what looks good as well, having a I don't know if the nose is the correct term, but having a look at their LinkedIn, it will reflect good on yourself. You know, if you've been having a look around those profiles and seeing any similarities in terms of, you know, content that you're sharing or stuff that might interest panel members in specifics, because you can prepare to work around that. So I see it as a good sign when, you know, if I'm hosting interviews for whatever reason and people are having a look at my profile, obviously we'll be interviewing for different jobs, but you know, showing a genuine interest from the candidate to want to learn more ahead of interview. I think that may be it, unless we get any further questions.
Yeah, probably. We'll give it 10 more seconds.
Cool.
Yeah, it doesn't look, James, like we have any other ones coming in, so we can call it there. You've put your email in there, so if anybody does have any questions that arise after this, I'm sure James would be happy to hear from you. And like was mentioned, this will be posted on the hub space on the AphA website, so you can look back if you want to kind of go through some of the responses and stuff. And I know, James, I think you're doing some other sessions with one of the branches coming up as well, potentially.
Yes. Yeah, we're doing quite a few, so hopefully this won't be the last you hear from me. And yeah, thank you very much for all attending. If you have any more questions, please feel free to email the AphA email address, and I'll follow up as soon as I can.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you everybody for coming, and